Danse, papastem tsihasun. So my name is Whitehorse. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'm going to be showing you and we're demonstrating and talking a little bit about straight stitch beading. Now, straight stitch beading is the most common type of beading that you see. It's on regalias, it's on medallions, and it's the type of stitch, beading stitch that you'd use if you're making, say, moccasins and you're adding the beading onto anything, like any absolutely anything, clothing or artistic pieces. But straight stitch is one of the most common stitches, uh, and you could see here it's just following lines, following a pattern, and they are basically stitched in a straight manner. That's why we call it straight stitch. However, with something like this, of course, uh, you can't just lay out, say, on a piece like this, uh, in one row. You may have 40 or 50 beads, so you're not going to lay out 40 beads and just tack them down. No, there's specific patterns that people follow to make sure that the beads stay secure and that they're not falling off and then that they're not going all crooked. And most people, when they're doing straight stitch, you're only working with either 5 or 10 beads at a time. So remember, we're sewing with the small, usually size 10 or size 11 seed beads. These are size 11 seed beads, so uh, they're pretty small. So with these size 11 seed beads on this straight stitch, I'd be going usually probably 5 beads before tying it down to make sure that we're not getting beads that are just sort of hanging off. So something like this, where they've used cut beads, they lay a little closer and a little flatter together. So you could probably go anywhere from 5 or even 10 beads before tacking them down. But I guess even before you get there, you definitely need to know what kind of pattern you're using. Now, with most, what they'll do is they'll draw their pattern right on their beading felt. So most of the beading that you see, like on the medallions or on moccasins or on vests, it's done on beading felt. It's not done directly onto the leather or onto the cloth that the people are wearing, because it's really hard to bead onto cloth, especially cotton cloth or nylon cloths, because it doesn't hold the beads in place properly, and you tend to get a lot of shifting and moving of the fibers. So we normally use beading felt. Now, beading felt is not the kind of regular kind of felt that you can't just go to your craft store and pick up the regular felt, because with the beading felt, it's more tightly woven. So you could see that it's sort of thinner, and the the threads on it or the fibers on it are fairly compact, so they're really tight together. So it does make it uh, almost like a thick cardboard. But with the beading felt, like I said, this is commonly the most common thing that people do the straight stitch on. You can either draw your pattern directly onto the beading felt, or some people will take, say, a, a picture that they've printed off or something that they have from before, and they would just put it onto their paper, onto their beading felt. So say I was using this design, I would just put this on there and kind of stitch it, just roughly stitch it around onto my beading felt, and then I'd be laying my beads exactly in the pattern that they are on the picture that I'm doing. However, most of the time with myself and with a lot of the people that do beading that I know, especially on moccasins and stuff, we just draw our pattern right onto the felt itself. So we're just going to make a really quick feather pattern, and I'm just going to draw a really quick, rough feather pattern that I'm going to follow. So I've drawn my pattern onto there. It's the center. Here's the top of the feather. And from there I could just even make the lines to make it look more like a feather. So this is going to be my feather pattern that I'm going to use to follow my beading. I'm just trying to make these look a little bit more like a feather rather than a leaf. All right, so I've just got a really quick pattern there drawn onto my felt. So once I've got my pattern on there, I could take my needle and start beading right away. So with a straight stitch, like I said, it's done usually in a straight line. So I'm actually not gonna start right from the top to the bottom. With most of the beading that we do, we start somewhere where usually like a wide part is good to start at. So I'm gonna start here, and from the bottom of my felt, I'm going to poke through right onto my where my pattern is, pull my thread through, and I'm going to make sure that I tie a knot on here so I don't just pull the thread all the way through. And just a quick knot there. And once I've got my thread in line there, I can just start putting beads on. So I'm going to go with 5, and I'm going to be using, just so you could see, this is usually done with, like I said, the size 10 or 11 seed beads on the same beading felt. But for the purpose of this, I'm just showing you using crow beads just so you get an idea, and it's easier to see what I'm doing. So I'm gonna take, and I said I'm gonna go 5 beads at a time for each of my lines. So I'm gonna lay this, the outer these dark parts are gonna be blue and the centers are gonna be white. And I'm just gonna quickly and roughly from where my thread is measure the distance to my next bead, just so I can measure that my beads are lining up. And then I could see I can go with my, so that's going to line up there on my pattern. So I've got 5 beads on there right now. I'm going to just roughly look at where those beads ended, because that's where my needle is going to go in. So I'm going to put those beads on there, try and eyeball as best as I can to where my thread should go down, and I'm going to go through and tack that down. So now I've got my first set of beads on there. Now when I'm coming back through these beads, I'm actually going to come back not through all 5 of them. I'm going to go somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to go, say, to the third one, and I'm just going to, might take a little while just to make sure I'm straight in line, and just keep poking until you get as straight as you can to the where you're coming up between that second or third bead. Pull that up, and I'm going to go back through these beads that I've already tacked down. So you'll see I'm going back through them. Pull that through, and that sort of tacks them down and tightens them up. So you'll see that now those are tacked down onto my pattern. Now I can go on to my next beads, and I saw that I've had 3 there, so I can pretty much rough estimate that the next ones will be 3. If I want to check, I can. And then my outer bead on my black line here, I'll just put that all the way through just to give it a good check to see how it is, and I see that it's lined up. So I'm going to see where that, and I'm just going to push my thread, needle and thread through there, pull those tight, and you see I have my first row on this. Now again, I could come back up either at my second or third bead just to tack those down. However, when you're using, say, the size 10 seed beads, if you're going 5, then you generally don't have to come back all the way through. So I'm just going to quickly line up so I'm straight in line with my needle and thread. Come back through those. So those are tacked down really good and they're going to stay in place. They're not going to be lifting or coming up. So here again, I'm going to go down. And then I'm going to come up for my next row. So I'll just keeping in mind how wide the beads are. Come up at the next row on my pattern. So right about there. Pull my thread up and I can go ahead and do the same that I did on my first row. Now with the crow beads, it's a little hard to do because the thread is much smaller than the hole in the crow bead. But once you're using the seed beads, it lays out much tighter and closer together like you would on a pattern like this because the beads are smaller and the thread fits fairly snug in the beads, not like with the crow beads and the sinew that I'm using here. So again, I could tell that the next row is pretty much the same as the last. So I can go ahead and put on my one blue and my three white and the other blue and just line those up on my pattern. You see they're gonna go where they should. Go back through the bottom. And again, you see with the crow beads you can really see that when you're not going back and tacking through the second or third bead, how the beads sort of bow out and they sort of move around. That's why we go back and tack through the beads that we've just laid down. So again, I'm going back 3, coming up, and I'm going back through those 3. The other thing that does is when I add my next beads, it's making sure that my thread is pulling it straight against the previous bead. So again, I see I've got 1, 2, 3. And 4. Line those up, and I see that they're going to line up. Sort of mark my needle on the pattern, pull that through, and I've got that in line. So again, going back 3 just to tack those down and make sure they're not going to be bowing up or anything. And going back through them. And then again, I'm going to start again by going down through my pattern right at the end of this row and coming up where my next row is going to start. And again, just poking around until I think my needle is pretty close to where it should come out. And then I'm ready to start my next row. And I'll just continue going back and forth the same way I did these rows. And this takes a lot of patience because if you imagine doing that how many times to get a pattern like this, where you're going back and forth, going 10 beads and tying down every 5 beads, going through, looping back, coming back, all this time, it does take a lot of time and patience. But again, it's not, although you do mess up sometimes, it doesn't happen a lot because when you're first starting, especially, I really recommend that you keep laying down your beads and sort of marking on your pattern, making sure you don't have one bead too many or not enough beads to finish that length of pattern that you're doing. So again, key point is to make sure you have your pattern down, whether it's on a paper or whether it's drawn right onto the felt. But that is how we do straight stitch. So I hope you enjoyed and I hope you try out doing straight stitch. Thanks for joining me today.